Welcome back to the Jacob Wright podcast. In this episode, I speak with Dr. Ken Rotondo. Dr. Rotondo is the president and founder of Rehavior, where he applies machine learning and AI to scale effective patient and client communication in healthcare settings. A veterinarian by training with an MBA from RPI, Ken has operated 5 veterinary hospitals, served as president of the New York State Veterinary Medical Society, worked with the National Cancer Institute, American Medical Association, and University of Pennsylvania on improving medical engagement. He lectures at Wharton and Cornell and has presented his findings at IBM Think, HIMSS, and Vet Health Global. Enjoy this episode where I catch up with my mentor and talk about what is coming for both of our companies. Enjoy.
Yeah. Almost 50 years of veterinary medicine. Well, what the interesting thing is when I graduated in the late 70s, I guess you could say I was a serial entrepreneur and no one knew how to spell entrepreneurship because I joined a practice and then built 4 more, which was unheard of back then. Most people just aspired to be in one practice. And I was the first of 3 generations to graduate from high school. So I was very pleased to have even accomplished to get to vet school. And I wanted to make the most out of it as a business career. My old Italian father told me buy real estate whenever you can. So I bought the land for all of my veterinary practices, and then I realized buying real estate was a good idea, and I bought more land and investment property and commercial property. And I came to the stark realization one day that I could read X-rays and lab work, but I couldn't read a financial statement. So I went back to RPI and got an MBA. First semester into that, I realized I took accounting, got to read a financial statement, and I said, okay, now what do I do for the next 2 years while I'm in this program? And I became intrigued with organizational behavior, group dynamics, how people make decisions. And unbeknownst to me, while I'm getting my MBA, there are a couple guys by the name of Richard Tailor and Daniel Kahneman who are creating this entire concept of behavioral economics. And so I was sort of stumbling along until they became household names. And I said, well, okay, that's really interesting stuff. People are irrational. They don't make rational decisions. Maybe that's why we in veterinary medicine encounter such poor adherence and compliance, is that it's not that we're not communicating well. It's just we're not communicating effectively and dealing with various idiosyncrasies. So from that, I sort of ricocheted through a variety of different things, which eventually morphed into what is now Rehavior. And so that's the fastest version I can give you of my ricocheting journey.
So you're saying that when you were in business school, that's when you started really seeing that behavioral economics, I guess, is now the category.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, I can remember sitting in a class, and there was a very simple thing that everybody in business knows, but we in veterinary medicine, at least me, didn't know. They showed the 4 stages of group dynamics when you're in an organization. Forming, storming, norming, performing, and there was this curve that went up as you went through the stages. Well, I had this aha moment sitting there and say, geez, I used to think that things were just falling apart because of the group dynamic changes and running and I had at one point in time, I had over 100 employees in my veterinary practices. And there are certain days you walk in and you go, wow, I'm spending all my time dealing with personnel issues, right? And who's unhappy with somebody else or whatever. And I realized that as the group dynamics changes, somebody needs to be there to sort of understand that some of this is a normal psychological interaction. And so I had that aha moment. And then from there, again, with the understanding of behavioral economics, I ported that into how do I communicate more effectively. And then that led to me having an interest, and we formed what is now Rehavior. And we did some interesting work with Amazon, Costco, H&R Block. But then when COVID came along, we tried to vaporize like most companies did during COVID. And I decided, I retired very, rather comfortably from veterinary medicine and my other investments. And I said, if I'm going to have a business, I want to do business for good. So we do work in cancer screening, addiction recovery, medical adherence, almost all in the human healthcare space. Because up until recently, I couldn't, even though I was pretty well known in the veterinary profession for, after I got my MBA, I did a lot of public speaking and for all the major conferences, and then farmers would hire me to go to talk to their clients. But veterinary medicine was very slow to adopt, and it's a smaller market. So for me to be the most effective and want to do good, we did good in the human healthcare space, and we're still doing that. But in the last year, since last October, because of the economic challenges that are facing the veterinary profession, patient visits are down, and cost of goods and payroll is higher, and revenue's not growing. People are looking at scalable, actionable solutions, and now they're coming back to asking me to be more involved, or us, in the form of behavior. So that's sort of the full circle of where we all are, and why you and I are talking to each other.
Yeah. The interesting thing about your comment on compliance in the vet space is essentially what you're saying is that you are able to identify, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but these 4 different categories of maybe not buyer, but decision maker. And they have some form of motivation of one of these 4 categories. And your positioning is that, okay, we can identify who is which decision maker or what motivates them. And then that can frame your communication. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's absolutely correct. So what we know about behavioral economics very succinctly is that the subconscious drives most of our decision making and choice for everybody and everything we do in our life. What does that mean? That means people respond heuristically. What does that mean? That means that most of our decisions done by the subconscious is based on past experiences, mental shortcuts, and conscious cues in the moment. And yet we like to think we're very rational, but we're not. And that's why there's this thing called buyer's remorse, right? Why did I spend so much money for this? Because in the moment I felt like it was the right thing to do. Or sometimes in healthcare, we decline decisions that are in the best interest of our own health or well-being, or for our pets. So then when you read about this with Kahneman and Thaler and other behavioral scientists, you realize, wow, there's 180 different cognitive biases. There's all kinds of things that contribute to this irrational decision making. It's all very interesting. What do I do about it? So Rehavior came along, and we figured out a way to operationalize that. And what we do is we identify any behavior we want to influence or change. We have a machine learning AI research program we do on that on a sample population, and we're able to identify, instead of one size message fitting everyone, we're now able to say, guess what? You have 3 or 4 different subsets of people in this group. And by asking 3 or 4 questions on their onboarding sheet, we can tell you what their mindset is and what to say and what to avoid. To give you an example, we doubled colorectal cancer screening in a Black community in West Philadelphia. And by the way, the University of Pennsylvania published this work in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So this is somewhat, you could call it evidence-based. Very few young companies can say our proof of concept is published in JAMA. But here's what's very ironic and telling about all this. In that study, we found a group of people that we could identify that when Jacob comes in and he's 60 years old and he hasn't had any colorectal cancer screening, I talk to Jacob, and what do we normally do? We give him the factual, rational reasons why he should get colorectal cancer. Well, Jacob's sitting there listening to all of this, and a lot of it's bouncing off his forehead. And so, but now I know something about Jacob. I said, Jacob, because of our study, do you have grandchildren? Yes. Do you want to dance with your granddaughter at her wedding? Do you want to see your grandson graduate from college? Because if you don't do this, you're statistically less likely to be around for your family and for your. So that is Jacob's motivator. Now, what healthcare professional is going to know about that, about Jacob, before they go into the conversation? And it's not even part of your repertoire in the 8 minutes you have with Jacob to talk to him about colorectal cancer screening. So this gives them insight into that individual. Found another group of people in that group that you don't want to mention early detection, death, disease, or dying, because they have a strong temporal bias. They don't want to hear bad news. And if they think it could be bad news, they're going to procrastinate. So now what do I say to Jacob if he's in that group? I say, Jacob, you're in good health. Your lab work is great. You're physically fit. This is a natural continuation of what you do. So what I'm telling you is the facts don't change. We're just framing the conversation differently. And I would challenge anybody that's looking at this podcast, say, where do you find a tool like that out there in the current communication workplace? I mean, and communication is foundational to everything we do in business, right? Everything we do in business is, and yet we haven't changed the way, oh, we've done the Myers-Briggs stuff and all the rest of it. But, Myers-Briggs was created like 30 years ago. In today's world, the fax machine's more modern than Myers-Briggs. It's good foundational information, but we can do so much more.
So you, or maybe this term you've phrased, the HMI, right? Health Motivation Identifier. Is that what we're talking about? And that is that's a Rehavior term.
That's a behavior. So that comes out of our research into the behavior we want to change. So basically, what it is today. Think about this. Today we marvel at the capabilities of AI, okay? And it's really good. But just pause for a minute to consider, are we truly leveraging these advantages to operationalize communication, not just to automate tasks? The first thing that's happening with AI in communication is let's automate the task of the medical record keeping. And I'm not saying that's not a bad idea. It's just going to make the practitioner's life easier, but is it going to generate more revenue? Adherence in veterinary medicine is less than 50%. You think about it, you have better odds of a coin flip, okay, going into if you go up to a client and say, heads, you follow my recommendations, tails, you don't, you're going to have better odds than what we have in veterinary medicine right now. So I think, why don't we use what the research we do, this HMI, and that allows us to deepen understanding, foster connections, and drive more meaningful communication with the client. But this can also be used. I'm working with Deloitte right now, and we've got some conversations going on where they're going to use us to improve recruitment, retention, and engagement in staffing in large organizations in healthcare. So, think about it as using AI, and the Health Motivation Identifier is the tool that comes out of our research. Does that make sense?
Yes. So that is one application of it, but it doesn't have to be necessarily healthcare or clients or maybe patients. It can also be used in staffing, let's say.
In staffing, we're working with two large pharmaceutical companies right now in the pharmaceutical space in clinical trials. Do you know that in the pharmaceutical space, for every day in human medicine, for every day that a clinical trial is delayed, it can cost the pharmaceutical company $600,000 to $8 million per day in lost sales. Now, in veterinary medicine, that's an incomprehensible number, okay? But in human medicine, those are the numbers you're talking about. And where do we come in? We're able to identify the principal investigators, which ones are have the best behavioral component to run a good clinical trial, and more importantly, selecting the patients. Right now, they only select the patient based on the clinical condition they want to evaluate. But some patients are miserably bad compliant, right? They're not going to do a good job. And if they drop out of the clinical study, they still remain in the denominator. So they detract from the results. Not only do they slow the clinical study down because they have to be replaced, but they being remaining in the denominator, they screw up the results. So there's so many applications to this across the board.
So as we'll get into this later, but as I back to B2B sales and particularly targeting groups or enterprises, I want to ask your opinion, or I want to ask how you frame the pitch for Rehavior. You mentioned earlier that you said, does that drive more revenue when we were talking about compliance in veterinary medicine? Are you leading when you go to a practice group or an organization and say, hey, we're Rehavior, this is what we do? Are you leading with margin increase or top line increase? Or are you leading with client satisfaction or a different metric to lead that pitch? Or are you changing the pitch based on the group?
Well, I think that's the answer. You have to know your audience, right? What motivates them? The old saying of "What's in it for me?" What keeps you up at night? And it varies. I mean, and sometimes it's surprising how people insidiously put up with poor results. I mean, think about this. There's 20. We're just now starting to get some traction because of the work we've done to get payers in the human healthcare space to use us to improve colorectal cancer screening. There's there's 25 million people in the United States that are overdue for colorectal cancer. And if for every 100,000 that increased screenings to the cost out of the 25 million, it saves the system $1.25 billion in cancer treatment based on the incidence of finding a polyp and a polyp turning into cancer. Well, you would think that insurers, based on that number, would be cascading to us to do it. But nobody operates in a vacuum. They don't see communication as the thing they're going to change. They all look at something different. And so you raise a very, very good question, and that is what motivates people. So I basically go in and it depends. I just gave a keynote to the Canadian Animal Health Institute, and I just started, and it was a very diverse audience. And to them, when I talked to that audience, I just said, let's stop and think for a minute how important communication is in everything we do, from the C-suite to establishing our mission and purpose and our culture, to the vice presidential level on how to implement that and hire and recruit, to sales and marketing. So I went through it all and said, to that group, I just talked about communication in general. If I was talking to a veterinary aggregator, let's say I was talking to one or a group of veterinary practice managers, I'd say, are you happy with the fact that over 50% of the people that come in to buy anything that you talk about that's a product, service, or idea in veterinary medicine, over 50% of the people are saying, no thanks, or I'll get back to you on that. I mean, that's not a great success story, except maybe if you were in baseball and you were batting 500 or 450, but that's not very good for business.
Yeah, that is true. There's a lot going on in the vet space, though, that I know communication is a very large part of the story here, but also in the vet space, there's the fact that it's a cash-based business and people are paying out of their pocket with their own money for whatever treatment they're trying to get. Yeah, there's insurance coming up, sort of stalling in the US. There's different benefit plans or packages that you can start to get at clinics, but overall, you're just going in and being asked to pay straight out of your pocket. And I think consumers, pet owners, don't really see the economics of the veterinary business to understand why things may cost what they cost.
Yeah, so I think so. The question you're asking me is where will communication improve that, or are we dealing with something we can't fix?
Well, I'm only commenting that I believe communication is a very big part, and maybe the industry could look a lot different if communication was framed entirely differently to pet owners at large. But I think there's also factors that we can't fix.
I think it was Peter Drucker, he was from UCLA. You're a California guy. You may know who this guy is, but he was a very famous business manager. And he had a statement years ago that said, price only becomes an issue in the absence of value. And so I think it's very easy. And veterinary medicine I've been around for almost 50 years in this profession, right? So it's very easy to make an excuse why it doesn't work. And I think Albert Einstein has a great quote. It says, "We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." I think what's making it critical right now is, yes, we're seeing more now as more expensive than we've ever been in veterinary medicine. I think you're absolutely correct. And the fact that pet health insurance has not gotten the traction. I mean, when you think about it, after 40 or 50 years of pet health insurance being around, they've successfully captured 2 or 3% of the marketplace. I mean, there's another story in all of that. I mean, and I don't know enough about it to comment, but you can't ignore the fact that, fewer than 3% of all pets have pet health insurance. So I think you raise valid points, but persistent in all of this is the fact that we have not done a good job of communicating the value that Drucker was talking about, right? And it isn't that we have to go in and show them all the financial benefit. It's not a decision-making algorithm, a cost-benefit analysis. It goes back to what we just talked about. How do people feel in the moment? How well are you communicating with it? And I think I sent you a video on the pet dental example, right? And just finding those individuals, someone who they're motivated by their fear of their pet not having some catastrophic problem. Somebody else says, just give me some rational facts on why I should do it. A third person says, okay, I do everything to be proactive and preventive, and this fits it. So those are three different conversations. Whereas what we try to do now in healthcare is we try to throw everything at them that we can think of in the moment. And for some reason, some of it bounces off the top of their forehead. They don't do anything. So I think I'm not saying that your premise isn't accurate. I think everything you said exists. But if we're but we're not optimal communicators. And in veterinary medicine, you're not going to be able to take people out of the veterinary practice and put them into a communication training program or whatever. In fact, if you really look at it, we talk about all the innovation councils and everything else in veterinary medicine. Our models are not that good to train people. I mean, they go to a conference, they're busy, they come back from the conference, they try to implement it into their staff. It's an inefficient model, as opposed to the world of AI having a tool that says, I know what to say to Jacob versus somebody else who comes in with the same problem right after him. So I think improving communication is not the panacea, but it's surely, we can do better. And the last thing I would say, and I'm an outlier in this space, but in the veterinary profession, there's a high degree of introversion. And nobody hires a sales force with a bunch of introverts. Okay, you don't go out and say, "Let me find a bunch of introverts to sell this product." But what you do have in the veterinary profession is a bunch of caring, dedicated people who are there because they want that animal to get good quality care. The only group of people that I have seen that are more caring and committed to the outcomes of their patient, or equally as caring and committed, are the people that work in addiction recovery. Because most of the people that are counselors in addiction recovery have had a personal life experience with addiction, and they're driven to it. But that same level of passion exists in the veterinary world. What we've not done, shame on us, the leadership of the veterinary profession, is we haven't given them the tools that they need, and more shame on us why we're not doing it now in the world of AI where this stuff is available, right? I mean, it's the last thing. So it's very nice to improve describing and make sure your note taking is more efficient and you get it done and you get home earlier. But that's not necessarily affecting outcomes where we need to have. Sorry to ramble on about that.
Let's go to broader applications. So let's say, okay, you go into a group or practice group and they say, yeah, we want to use Rehavior to change our communication with our patients and clients. What happens next?
Well, first of all, we don't work in the veterinary space right now, but I'll tell you what we do in healthcare. And it's even more challenging because in veterinary medicine, we've got the PIM system. And what is there, like 20 different PIM systems out there or whatever? In human healthcare, you've got EHRs, which are really, big businesses, and they don't like anybody messing with their EHR. So we have to get integrated into that. So we've hired a company that integrates that for us and into that system seamlessly. So you have to remove all friction when you're going in. So if somebody wants to use our tool, the fact that there's no additional staff training, all we do is plug in our tool into the natural flow of communication. So we're very adept to know that everybody onboards patients a little bit differently. Some practices, fewer and fewer in human healthcare, are analog, where everything's written out on paper and then posted in. More are using tablets and things like that. So our 4 questions for every behavior we want to change is easily implemented into that. So then when the patient comes in and they're talking to you about diabetes, hypertension, or cancer screening, they just tap on the screen and your persona pops up, what to say, what to avoid. After they've used that for maybe a day or two, it becomes automatic. I mean, you see 4 or 5 different patients and you're tapping on the screen, and then automatically, as you saw that example in dental care in veterinary medicine, you're talking about people that are reading CBC's lab work and drawing conclusions. You give them these 3 questions. This is so fundamentally simple. And what we find in the human healthcare side, we did a study where we decreased less than 30-day readmissions for congestive heart failure in a large hospital from 17.6% to 4.8%. And the nurses that came up to us were thanking us, saying, I can't believe how quickly I got to know this patient that was readmitted. And now I felt I could communicate them immediately on a level that understood. And within a day of using it, they were strong advocates. In the addiction recovery space, these people love what we do because I had one individual tell me, what I get out of those 4 questions on a person I've never seen before and talk to them about onboarding into recovery is the equivalent of 1 or 2 hours of motivational interviewing. I don't know if you know about motivational interviewing, but that's a very involved interrogative questioning process that takes hours and hours. I'm not saying we replace that, but we give the healthcare provider that level of confidence going forward, that they're excited that they can make a difference. And think about it, Jacob, you've been in the business world for a while. When you have an employee that feels confident in what they're doing and you give them that tool, that enriches them in their interactions beyond what you perceive is possible. And that's what we like to see.
What are the 4 questions?
Well, the 4 questions vary from every study that we've done. It's all statistically and algorithmically driven. So if you really want to have your audience's eyes glaze over in this podcast, so what we do is we do a study, we identify a sample population or behavior we want to change. And we start off evaluating them with something called a conjoint analysis. We present all different opportunities, and it's not an I ask you tell kind of survey, it's a stimulus response survey. And so now I probably already lost the audience by talking about conjoint analysis. But then from that, we run a series of machine learning algorithms and we identify these mindsets. So these are the 3 different mindsets we have now for people, how you communicate in dentistry. But then how do we know to the general public? We know that on the 1,000 people we surveyed or we did their study on. How do we apply that to the general public? Well, there's a statistical algorithm called the discriminant function analysis. And what that says is we can go back into our research and find out which of the statements and questions we can ask are most predictive to assign someone to the mindset that they belong to. And this is all machine learning driven. The end user sees nothing of this. Okay, the person watching this video who's running a veterinary clinic, what he's most concerned about is, can I ask Jacob 4 questions, and based on and that takes 30 seconds. Does that now enable me to know what to say and what not to say? So Jason's going to be motivated. So if I told you, so every one of those questions change based on, there's a different set of questions for addiction recovery, cancer screening. For colorectal cancer screening, we're doing one for breast cancer screening. It will be totally different. If we do one we're doing work with parasiticide compliance and adherence, so that'll be a different set of questions. So each one of those questions would be different.
Got it. They are framed differently based on whatever medical application or business application that you're trying to achieve, but they are all targeting the same thing, which is what sort of predisposition is the user or the client in this case, in what bucket. That's the objective of the questions.
Yeah, so we identify people. Our clients want to know, let's take veterinary medicine. I mean, if you look at all the things we could improve on, I sent you the video on the dental, right? But we have a tool that's available for parasiticides. We have a tool that's available for wellness testing, and we have a tool that is that we designed that was the basis of the research that was done by Nationwide when they did the spectrum of care work. So how to talk to someone when financial issues are a problem, are a barrier for them. They just can't afford it, right? So how do you offer something less than optimal that still treats the pet and doesn't create guilt on the side of the pet owner and doesn't cause stress to the veterinarian by not being able to give the optimal service? So we have all of those tools out there, and they can all be in a PIM system. And so when the vet wants to talk to someone or the healthcare provider, they just tap on the screen and know what to say. I mean, this is where machine learning. Remember, we just said a little ago, are we applying machine learning and AI where we can optimize it? Well, this is really optimizing, and I challenge anybody watching this to say, where else is it out there in the veterinary space that you can communicate with this degree of efficiency? And I don't think it exists. If it does, I haven't seen it.
Now, I would like to give you our pitch, and then we can figure out a way to work together.
Okay.
So the last episode actually on this on this channel is the pitch that I give to venture capital. So obviously that's the viewer, but I'll give it to you now as a sort of cross healthcare leader. What we are creating are AI employees, and our goal is to replace administration inside of veterinary healthcare. When I ran Vitama and ran the group and grew across 3 states, I saw how quickly administrative burden comes into the clinic and eats your margin, eats your morale, eats your employees' satisfaction. Because at the end of the day, administration is required to provide care, but it's not driving any revenue or service to customers. So what does that look like? We have created roles. We've created we call them work agents, personas that take over entire bodies of work inside of a clinic. We have a receptionist, we have a billing agent, pharmacy agent, engagement specialist, and in training is a scribe, just like everybody else. There's many scribes. But the idea is that you allow our employees to run the operations of the practice so that you and your team focus on care, outcomes, and human-to-human interaction.
That's good. I think first of all, it's the future. I mean, it's going to happen. I guess the challenge that you're going to find with AI, and I had the opportunity to speak with a number of and co-present with people who are bringing AI into the veterinary space, and there's a real fear of being eliminated. Okay, so I don't think I'm telling you anything that you haven't already heard. I mean, the idea of am I going to be replaced as a diagnostician is if I'm a radiologist, will you need radiologists anymore? I mean, could you train the model to read, or will you need as many radiologists as you need? The idea that administration, doesn't. I think you use the statement. Administration currently doesn't do much to drive revenue or service. But yeah, I think if I were presenting it in the veterinary space or anywhere, well, let me back up a minute. As you know, I was on the AVMA Futures Commission, and I gave one of the first keynotes at the. I was asked by Eleanor Green to give a keynote at one of the first veterinary innovation summits. And I said, well, you don't want to hear from an old veterinarian who's got a bunch of opinions. I said, but I work, one of my advisors is a chief technology officer at IBM. He's on my advisory board. And he introduced me to John Iwata. John Iwata was the guy who brought Watson to Jeopardy, right? And so he was way back 30 years ago talking about artificial intelligence. And so I got to know John Iwata, and he and I co-presented down at one of the first veterinary innovation summits. And he basically said, the way you want to present AI is not necessary, even though the word is much more comfortable to people now than it was 2 years ago. But if I were selling this into the veterinary space and I were you, I would sell it in the framework of augmented intelligence. You've got to have people in the organization, but you're not I wouldn't talk about replacing the people in the organization. I would talking about augmenting the connectivity that you have with the pet owner and the pet consumer, and improving the efficiencies within the organization so that everybody's quality of life, work experience, and deliverable is done more efficiently. So you see the difference between what I just presented and what you just presented? I said, you gave me all the factual, rational reasons why. Just like in healthcare, that's what we do. Colorectal cancer, dental care in pets, whatever. Here's the factual. This is why it's good. But if you remember the top of our conversation, people are irrational and emotional, and they respond subconsciously. So I would quote Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou said, people are not going to remember what you said. They're not going to remember what you did. They're going to remember how you made them feel. And so what I tend to do is when I introduce my product and you introduce yours, you want to introduce this so in a way that they become eager. And in your deck, and you and I have had this conversation before, when you're presenting to someone, the first 3 slides that you present have to create an aha moment that somebody sits there and says, oh my God, That is a problem that I deal with, and it's a real problem. And this sounds like a solution I have never heard before that I think really can make my life better or make the pet's life better or whatever. That would be the only feedback I would give you. I think the idea is brilliant, but you got to know that there's going to be resistance out there. And
yeah, I definitely know that there's resistance. As this last week, I've actually been on the pavement. I've been going door to door to clinics and businesses, knocking in and introducing myself and the product. And I've learned a lot in this 1 week of door to door sales on how to present this product. One thing that I always come back to, though, is we are, as an industry in the vet space in particular, have been talking for how many years now about this labor shortage? In my whole positioning, because I felt this when I was running a practice group, was why don't we have every person that works in this practice group be a part of patient outcome? Whether you are a veterinary assistant doing TPR and taking patient history and giving, next guard on the way out and saying goodbye, or you're an RVT doing a little bit more, or you're a vet. If we had every person in the vet space that works in the vet space doing patient outcome, we wouldn't have a shortage of medical providers that we keep talking about. That's my opinion on it. And so my thought is, why don't you go into a clinic and you reallocate the staff you already have to, instead of doing keyboard number crunching things, you have them start doing patient outcomes.
I don't disagree with that. I will tell you this, though. I'm not one of the people that believe that there's a veterinary shortage. Okay. For instance, if you go anywhere in the United States and you book an appointment with a veterinarian, you can get a veterinary appointment within 2 weeks. So by definition, that's not an economic shortage of veterinarians. What there is what you just alluded to, is there's an inefficiency in the delivery model. That is the problem. And why? You take any town in America, go out and Google and see how many veterinary practices service that town of 30,000 people. Okay, and you're going to find out that there's an overcapitalization of veterinary clinics, and every one of them needs some techs and vets and receptionists and all the rest of it. So it's not a very efficient model. Now, there are going to be people out there, we all know who they are, who've been saying for years there's a veterinary shortage, and now we're building 10 new veterinary hospitals. I predict to you that in 5 or 7 years from now, they're going to be people saying, where are all these veterinarians going to find work? So, you can call me crazy, but if I'm right, in 5 or 8 years, come back and look at this podcast. Okay. So, but I think you can improve operations right now in the current moment. And think about this. Going out and building a new veterinary college somewhere, that's great, except how long is it going to be before you get these? Because it's taken them 4 years to go through the process, right? That's before, and not even think, how long does it take to build the veterinary college and put it out there? So the problem is not going to be solved in the near term anyway. So building more veterinary colleges is not the answer in the short term. The answer in the short term is finding out more efficient delivery opportunities, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah. So tell me, what is the thing that's most exciting for you in your business and looking at the vet space or any industry, and what's most exciting for you?
Well, I don't have to be doing this. I'm retired, but I love what I do. I love the interaction of the people I work with. Just before this call, I was on the phone with a Kresge chaired professor of marketing at the Wharton Business School. And he's on my advisory board. And I met him quite by accident years ago. And from 2012 to COVID, I was a guest lecturer at the Wharton Business School. And for one day a year, I would go down and speak to 3 different classes. And we were just reminiscing about different things. And so I go through life doing business for good, interacting with people that are curious and forward thinking and innovative. And when you're an old guy like me, and I can hang around with young guys like you, or people that are actually, looking to change business, or, improving addiction recovery rates, and I'm meeting with, political leaders in many different states right now to to deal with the opioid crisis and all the rest of it. Well, who gets that opportunity in life? So, what's meaningful to me is, just having some insights that people want to hear about. And, that's, it doesn't, it's not always about the money. You like to be successful and be recognized, but it's also about, what you're doing to contribute to society.
When you're talking to startup folks, myself, or other young founders, what advice can you give about being ambitious in regulatory environments, being ambitious in trying to move fast in slower moving sectors, in laggard sectors? I would say healthcare and veterinary at large, or slower moving industries. What advice can you give founders building in this space?
I think one of the things is, there's a great book, Think Again by Adam Grant. And, and he talks about testing the hypothesis all the time. You come up with a great idea, you want to go to market, you think it's really good. But, the people that are going to be early adopters are going to be different than the people that are going to take it, where you're going to have a big market penetration. So I guess the overall message would be prepared to pivot. Pivot isn't changing everything you're doing, but making some adjustments. Don't be so tied into what you believe is your value proposition. Your core value proposition could be absolutely correct. How people perceive it, and then to go back to our earlier conversation, when you say, when you go into the marketplace and who you're talking to, I believe we tend to want to go in and tell people how great our product is, where in fact we should be asking interrogative questions, meaning, how do you feel about this? What keeps you up at night? Why is this? And get them to think, get them to engage in a conversation around your solution and see how it's meaningful to and idiosyncratically unique to them. And I think we tend to, I mentor a lot of startup companies in the US and Canada, and I find that a lot, the passion of what we do, and we so believe in it. I did it myself. I was so infatuated with these algorithms that we put together that were able to apply this to communication. I would go around and talk about, I would be talking about conjoint analysis, multivariate regression, factoring and clustering, discriminant functionality. People's eyes glazed over. That wasn't what was important to them. What was important to them is getting somebody to say yes to a medical procedure or to some other procedure. So I just want them to rethink how does a customer perceive it? And the last thing that's most important for what you're doing right now and anyone else is remember that these people don't operate in a vacuum. So they got a lot of other stuff pulling at them, and you've got to get some space in the front of their brain with all the other stuff that they're dealing with in the course of the day, that they're going to think, wow, this guy Jacob Wright's got something I hadn't heard that before. This is intriguing. I want to learn more. And if you don't, and that has nothing to do with what the product, service, or idea is. It has to do with how effective you are in getting their attention. Does that make sense?
Yes. So that leads me to another question. When you're talking about capturing attention of sales leads, what is the best strategy that you've seen for cold leads? These are people that are on your list. You have no connection to them. You are starting a relationship from zero. What is the best strategy that you have?
I would say open with an interrogative question that's relevant to them. I'll give you an example. I was at a big health conference in human healthcare, and a very senior person in Blue Cross and Blue Shield from California was a presenter, and I got to talk to him after the presentation. And I went up to him and I said, "Listen, if I told you that I could give you an actionable tool that would increase colorectal cancer screening rates amongst your insured population by 20%, would you ask for my business card?" He looked at me and he goes, "Do you have a business card?" I go, "Yeah." So the point is, it's got to be relevant to them, right? And the other thing that's got to be very clear to entrepreneurs watching this podcast is you got to deal with a lot of, not necessarily rejection. Yeah, it's really interesting, nice, and they never get back to you. Okay. But again, it goes back to what's going on in their world. Do they have time? Do they have other issues that they're attending to or whatever? And one of the things that's a common theme amongst all entrepreneurs is they're persistent. I mean, when they talk about, generational differences and what group doesn't want to work as hard as another generation, that doesn't. You could just take anybody who's an entrepreneur. 100 hours a week is nothing for these people, right? Anybody in the entrepreneurial space is committed to do whatever. We just have to do it wiser and understand more about the response that we're getting.
Any other advice or comments that you want to give and close on?
No, I just think I think the veterinary profession is at an inflection point right now. We're viewed differently in the public than we used to be. I think, we'd always go to a conference and hear a keynote presentation from CEO of a pharma, and he'd say, 90% of everybody who owns pets view that pet as a child. And then we're the most loved profession in the world, and we're recession proof. These were the common mantras of veterinary medicine. And people are waking up right now and saying, that's not so true. They may say they love their pet as a child, but they don't spend on their pet like it was healthy, like they do when they go to Costco and buy toys. But when it comes to healthcare, we're not getting the healthcare delivery that we need. So I think the last word I would say is that the veterinary profession and those people that are ostensibly leading us into the future of innovation should be thinking about what is the most actionable innovation we can take right now without waiting for new veterinary colleges or changing veterinary practice laws or whatever. What can we do in the near term to apply machine learning and AI? We can be infatuated with AI and all the opportunity, but how do we how do we operationalize it in veterinary medicine? And I think the people like you that are leading that conversation are going to do a lot of good for the veterinary profession.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Dr. Rotondo. I appreciate your time. And that's it for this episode.